Okay, well, welcome everybody. It's a really busy day today. We're going to have two pretty interesting performances for you. Our first speaker will be Anders Kasekamp. He graduated from U of T. Then he earned a PhD in history from the School of Slavonic and East European Studies at University College London. He's the Elmer Tamborod Chair of Estonian Studies and Professor of History in the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. Previously, he was also Professor of Baltic Politics at the University of Tartu and Director of the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute in Tallinn. He has held visiting positions at Humboldt University in Berlin, the Norwegian Institute for International Affairs, and the Institute of European History in Mainz. He's also served as the president of the Association of Advancement of Baltic Studies, editor of the Journal of Baltic Studies, as well as chairman of the board of the Open Estonian Foundation. His research interests, and there are many of them, include populist radical right parties, memory politics, European foreign and security policy, and cooperation and conflict in the Baltic region. He is the author of two books, one of which the prize-winning A History of the Baltic Studies. This one here. It's also in Latvian, by the way, and it has been translated into multiple languages. He has also edited multiple different publications. Currently, he's editing the Oxford Handbook of Modern Baltic History. We are eager and intrigued to hear his thoughts on geopolitics and the Baltic area experience. So welcome, Anders Kasekamp. And by the way, after his presentation, there will be questions and answer sessions, okay? So don't start thinking of questions already, even before he starts.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for those kind words of introduction. The subject that we agreed upon was the return of geopolitics to the Baltic. And the first point I want to make is that geopolitics never went away in the Baltic region. For many outside of the Baltic region, they had forgotten about geopolitics. I'm thinking in places like Berlin, Rome, Madrid, but in our area, in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, it never went away. Recently, when Russia launched its full-scale war against Ukraine in February 2022, which started on the day of Estonian independence, shortly after that, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and several other European leaders said that we should have listened to the Balts. The Balts were right to warn us. Well, it's nice to have been right, but that doesn't help us very much in the situation today, because those same European and American leaders who realized that the Balts had not been simply fear-mongering and paranoid, they don't sort of conclude from the fact they were wrong before that they should be following the advice of Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians today. So yeah, you were right about Russia's intentions, but we're not going to listen to you as to what we should be doing today vis-a-vis Russia's aggression, unfortunately. But the point I want to make about geopolitics never have gone away is that from the beginning, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which we can see on the map here, that's I suppose all of you recognize immediately that's a map from the 1930s and not not from the present. When our independence was restored in 1991, then the three Baltic states had a choice of where to orientate themselves. Most outside observers, advisors, analysts all recommended that the three Baltic states be neutral, like Finland, be a bridge between East and West, and profit from the trade in between. But Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians wanted to return to the West. Problem was that the West wasn't so eager initially. It was quite a struggle. In retrospect, it seems preordained, but it was a very long and difficult struggle to get into international organizations, Western organizations, particularly the European Union and NATO. So it took until 2004 before we actually got there. And there was a lot of reluctance, and there was a lot of concern that what about the treatment of the Russian-speaking minority, particularly in Estonia and Latvia, that this could be a concern. But Estonia and Latvia proved to NATO and Europe and the OSCE that their treatment of their minorities is following all the international norms, and actually doing better than perhaps some of the old member states in these organizations. Russia, of course, did not want to see the Baltic states in the EU or NATO. It caused difficulties with getting a border treaty signed back in the 90s and the early 2000s. Estonia still doesn't have a border treaty ratified with Russia. Latvia and Lithuania do. In the Estonian case, it had to, of course, do with not where the border lies, but the interpretation of history. In other words, the Soviet-Russian recognition of independence in 1920 and the recognition which was meant to be in eternity, perpetual, but which only lasted until 1940. And for the Russians, that border treaty is something just for historians, but for Estonians and Latvians, those border treaties are the foundation stones of the legal continuity of their statehood. So it's a very important principle, and that's what Russia of today is sort of unwilling to cede. And Estonia actually had, after having signed its border treaty with Russia in 2005, this was not ratified by the Russians for the same reason. And we came back to it in 2014, and it was going to be signed, well, actually it was signed in Moscow again in February 2022, but it hasn't been ratified because, of course, the Russians invaded Ukraine just a few short days afterwards. But having gotten into the EU and NATO in 2004, then that seemed to be for Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians a Fukuyamian sort of end of history, right? That for the first time in our history, our security and our prosperity has been guaranteed by those two organizations, and the future looked very rosy at that point in time. And from the point of view of NATO and the European Union, likewise. So, for instance, NATO never drew up any operational plans for the defense of the Baltic states. That happened only 6 years after they'd become members of the alliance. That had not been the case for any other members, because the thinking at that time was the relationship with Russia is based on sort of mutual common trade and mutual interests. And you'll recall, of course, back in 2009, the Obama administration had a reset policy with Russia, and as part of that, then the Baltic states were reassured. That was the wording at the time, which meant that the Baltic states were able to get some sort of operational plans. But it wasn't until the Russian invasion of Ukraine the first time, annexing Crimea and taking parts of the Donbass, that NATO got somewhat serious. Because what we had initially after joining in 2004, and it took many years to get this in place, was this temporary air policing mission by NATO member states, meaning 4 fighter jets on a rotational basis from NATO member states, Portugal, Turkey, Poland, for a 6-month rotation, would be policing the air. And this was just an ad hoc temporary mission, which has been made permanent since then, and it was based out of Šiauliai in Lithuania initially. Now it's also in Ämari in Estonia, so it's a bit of a larger contingent, but it's still air policing and not air defense, and there's an important difference there in the mission. But that was the entire NATO footprint for our region until 2014. And I think it's worth recalling that, because you'll probably have friends, neighbors, colleagues who like to think or fall for the false narrative that NATO expansion was somehow responsible for Russia's aggression against Ukraine. But as we see, in our region, NATO's footprint was negligible. And the footprint only increased in response to Russia's invasion in 2014, after which in 2016 we got the decision to have NATO's enhanced forward presence. So one multinational battalion, which is about 1,000 men and women, in each of the countries, right? So with everyone here knows, of course, that Canada is the framework nation or the lead nation in the case of Latvia, and the UK in the case of Estonia, Germany in the case of Lithuania, and the US in Poland. But this was only meant to be sort of a tripwire force. This was like the air policing, wasn't actually meant for combat. It was meant to be a deterrence. And if anything would actually happen, as the tripwire metaphor indicates, then the NATO plan was for a rapid reaction a week or so later at the quickest, where the NATO forces would come and liberate the Baltic states after they'd been rolled over by the Russian military. You might recall around that time there were studies by notable American think tanks like the RAND Corporation, which stated that the Russians would be in Tallinn or Riga within 60 hours of the start of any operation, and it would all be over. So that was sort of the NATO thinking, that they would then later come and respond and roll back the Russians. That sort of thinking has gone, hopefully, by the wayside now, after Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, particularly because the Baltic leaderships themselves have been very adamant that in any future scenario, the Baltic states would not, the Baltic militaries would not wait to be liberated, but from the get-go would respond aggressively. In other words, the Baltic militaries have ordered mid-range HIMARS, sort of American missile systems, where they can immediately launch behind Russian lines into Russia itself from the get-go. And this is sort of on the public record that many Baltic leaders have. I'm citing here, for instance, the chief of the Estonian Defense Forces, who has many times publicly said that from the beginning, our intent is to disrupt the enemy's logistics and deployments behind their lines right from the start, and to have the sort of independent ability to do so. This, of course, would be a conundrum for for NATO, because you can well imagine that our Western allies would not really want us to have the ability to act on our own. But having seen the brutality and atrocities that the Russians have perpetrated on Ukrainian soil, there is, of course, no desire to be liberated from Russian occupation. The whole aim of Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian military doctrine is to prevent that occupation in the first place. That's perhaps not the way that our Western allies see this. They, I believe, still have that sort of tripwire mentality. And the tripwire mentality, of course, depends on Russian forces, to put it very bluntly and cynically, killing a few American troops in their initial foray into the Baltic States. So it would get the Americans to respond. That you would have thought would be a sure thing in the past, but of course the U.S. has undergone a complete transformation since the beginning of this year under a new president who seems to be abandoning the core values of the NATO alliance, if not the NATO alliance itself. There were, of course, fears immediately, and they're already in the first Trump term, that Donald Trump would abandon or withdraw from NATO, which is something that he couldn't do on his own, which Congress would have to do. But as we've seen with this president, that he's doing all sorts of things, like the tariffs on Canada, which would also require congressional approval. But he's ignoring the Congress, and the Republican-controlled Congress seems to be okay with that at the moment. But I think that the U.S. probably would not withdraw from NATO. It would just remain in NATO and not do anything, which is perhaps even a worse situation for us. Initially, particularly in Trump's first term, the thinking of the Baltic states was that actually Trump is doing something positive, in the sense that the NATO member states, including Canada, were laggards in their defense spending, that the Western countries of NATO need to wake up. The Baltic states had already reached the 2% mark of defense spending on GDP, of 2% of GDP as defense spending, which most NATO countries had not come even close to, Canada being a good example of that. And Baltic leaders, while being alarmed at Trump's sort of anti-Ukrainian and pro-Russian sentiment and transactional nature, have, of course, praised Trump for scaring the Europeans into spending more money on their defense. And now in the second term, of course, it's dramatically increased, gone up from 2% to 3%, and now even 5%. And again, the three Baltic states are leading the way in this. And if one thinks that Trump is sort of purely transactional, then the Baltic states shouldn't have anything to worry about, right? Because they're the ones who are fulfilling, they're paying for their insurance policy. Unlike the other, Trump has said, those NATO allies that don't pay up, we're not going to help them. The Baltic states have paid up, so why should we worry? Well, it's much more about the credibility of the NATO deterrence in general, that when push comes to shove, can we rely on the sort of political decisions being made in Brussels and NATO to sort of quickly respond to Russian aggression. And we've sort of seen this over this past year as well, where Russia has been meddling in various ways which usually get termed sort of hybrid, right? So hybrid, most recently with drones, but also airspace incursions with actual fighter planes, their shadow fleet in the Baltic Sea, GPS jamming, cutting the underwater cable links that link the Baltic countries with the Nordic countries. And all of this has gotten a very sort of initially sort of tepid response. And the NATO countries have been sort of reluctant to take any strong countermeasures. So the narrative has been mostly about we need to build up our resilience, which is of course true, but it's very difficult to find how the NATO countries can reasonably sort of counter these sort of Russian actions in a way that's meaningful for the Russians, that would actually dissuade them, that would actually cause them some harm, because of course the Russians are not playing by the same rules. Well, they're not playing by the rules, right? Whereas the Western democracies are bound by the rule of law, and taking any action has to be within that framework, particularly if something like with the shadow fleet happens in international waters. So sort of the legal and technical attribution is a big issue. And then of course there's the constant fear of escalation as well. And I think that there's of course been a big difference between, I would say, the majority Baltic view and what we've had in Washington. In all the American administrations, Joe Biden, during this war in Ukraine, has constantly backed away from providing Ukrainians with the equipment, technology, and arms that they need, and cited the worry or the threat of World War III. And Trump has said the same. And many of the officials in both administrations also cited the same thing. But I think, of course, the lessons which most Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians instinctively know from their history, of course, with the Russians is that, well, Putin, as an old KGB man, he obviously knows the famous dictum from Lenin from the days of the Russian Revolution, of if you sort of stick in a bayonet in your enemy and you encounter only mush, then you keep pushing, but if you encounter steel, then you withdraw. And the sort of harsh lesson that Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians have learned from their history is that they do need to respond and react and not be a simple pushover. But it seems that every generation of Western leaders needs to sort of relearn that lesson. You can think one of the things which is very topical at this moment as we're speaking, which European leaders are trying to resolve, one of the best ways that we can help Ukraine, which would be sort of morally and financially sort of the simplest, is the billions in frozen assets which are held, of Russian sovereign assets which are held in Belgium, but which the European Union has, well, since the Americans are no longer willing to help in any way, the Europeans and the Canadians have already for more than a year been trying to get the Belgians to agree to release these Russian frozen assets to fund the Ukrainian war effort. And the Belgians have sort of cited their sort of fears, and the Belgian Prime Minister just yesterday, speaking at a public forum, mentioned that the Russians had threatened Belgium and himself personally with consequences that would last forever. That's the way a mafia state speaks, and it has an impact. And I think Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians, of course, throughout their history, are used to this sort of Russian rhetoric, but it is having an effect on European allies. And Mara, you give me a signal when how much time I have left, because I'm just getting rolling. Because in the university we have 2-hour lectures, right? So it's been within the European setting. It's been very difficult for the Baltic states to get their point of view across. We have strong allies, the Poles, who have now become probably the best armed and equipped nation in Central Eastern Europe. But very importantly, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine occasioned a total change in the public opinion in Finland and Sweden. Finland and Sweden, which had been neutral since the Napoleonic Wars, well, Sweden and Finland, which of course both been in the European Union since 1995, but their public opinions were strongly against NATO membership, changed overnight in the early months of 2022. And you'll recall that this began to change actually even before the invasion, because the Russian demands, there were negotiations which are now sort of forgotten. That Biden had met with Putin, the Americans were constantly talking with the German chancellor, the French president. They all went to Moscow to try to avert war. And this idea of sort of NATO expansion somehow being responsible for this, well, to my mind, the sort of simplest answer to that is look at Finland and Sweden joining and the Russian response to that, which has been pretty much shrugging their shoulders. If Russia was really concerned about NATO, they wouldn't have removed forces from the Finnish border, which is now their longest border with NATO. So it's really, the war is not about NATO, it's about Russia's domination of its neighbors, and specifically not tolerating an independent and democratic sovereign Ukraine. But in those same negotiations with the Biden administration, the Russian ultimatum in December 2021 was that NATO should withdraw to its 1997 boundaries. In other words, get out of the Baltic States. That is sort of the ultimate goal. So often we get, like in this context of geopolitics returning to the Baltic, you often probably all hear, are the Baltic states next, sort of rhetorically. But I would say that Putin's larger aim is not so much, the territory of the Baltic states. I mean, he does want to recreate the Russian Empire, there's no doubt about that. He wants to go down in Russian history as a leader like Peter the Great, who has always been his idol from the beginning. But the bigger aim, which is consistent with what the Soviets did in the Cold War, and Russia has held as an aim all along, has been to, first of all, split NATO, the transatlantic alliance, and with all of its hybrid actions, show that NATO is a paper tiger, that if NATO doesn't respond to serious threats on its territories, it's basically defunct. So that is the big prize, so undermining and basically eliminating NATO from the European continent as a serious challenger to Russia. Now I see I just have 1 minute left, and there's plenty of things we can talk about. But Mara told me not to be too gloomy. So let me say that if I started with the President of the European Commission saying that we should have listened to the Balts, then now actually Baltic voices are being heard, not just in Europe, but in the world. But particularly thanks to the high-profile positions of former prime ministers of our country in the European Commission. First of all, of course, former Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, who's the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Security Policy. In other words, its foreign minister. The former Prime Minister of Lithuania, Andris Kubilius, who's the first EU Commissioner for Defense Investment, which is a completely new portfolio in the EU. And of course, the most influential and longest-serving both in the European Commission and Vice President of the Commission, Valdis Dombrovskis, who's in charge of the finances. So our voices are being heard, we are present, but how much of an impact it's having, let me just finish with sort of one example. I was a bit disappointed that Kaja Kallas didn't become the NATO Secretary General, and we got the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte instead, and the NATO job came up before the EU job, and Kaja Kallas, in all respects, had the best CV for the job, but now, in retrospect, it's probably good it didn't happen that way, because the job of the Secretary General of NATO is to be the Trump whisperer. And so Mark Rutte can call Trump daddy, and Trump appreciates it, but Kaja Kallas would never do that. And Trump, of course, would never respect a woman who speaks her own mind. So it's good that she ended up in the European Union and not in NATO. So Baltic voices are being heard, but will they actually listen to the advice that Baltic voices are giving them? And that's the sort of ambiguous ending.
Let's just say that here. Thank you so much, Andres. Now we would love to take questions for a few minutes before we move on to the next part of our program. Michael has a question right there. Okay, I'll give you this. Go ahead.
Thank you. A word of explanation. I'm married to a Latvian. I'm not Latvian myself, but I have strong sympathies for Eastern Europeans, including Germans. So I have a rather, outrageous proposal. Why doesn't NATO and the West take the initiative by being less defensive and saying, look, the problem is that 1945 wasn't ground zero. I mean, if you believe in Baltic culture, it wasn't ground zero because the Baltics didn't exist as independent countries in 1945. You have to go back further and to recognize the Baltic presence, but also the German presence in Eastern Europe. So why doesn't NATO push for, say, expand Germany a little bit, give back Stettin and Danzig to Germany, give Kaliningrad, formerly Königsberg, to Poland, push back the borders of Poland into Russia. Russia, if you want to start a war, you can lose some territory too.
The former Zaluzhny, who was the first chief of the Ukrainian defense staff until he was sent to be ambassador in London last year, last week wrote an opinion piece for the first time in a while, and he basically said, how would victory in this war look? Well, a victory is the end of the Russian Empire. So that is kind of what you're suggesting as well, but that is a bridge too far for practically all of our Western leaders. And this has been consistent always. I mean, we go back in our history when Estonia, when Latvia were established for the first time as independent states after the First World War and the Russian Revolution, the policy of our Western allies, and particularly the US, was to maintain the Russian Empire intact. And they always have this instinctive fear of chaos and instability. And that's sort of the default mode for diplomats always. It's better the devil you know, and you're always afraid of what comes next. And also, I must say, the Russian leadership and Russian policymakers and sort of influencers have always been very good at suggesting that, well, what comes next might be much worse for you. Gorbachev suggested that about Yeltsin. Yeltsin suggested that about who comes, well, he meant Zyuganov, the communist leader, not Putin. But even when you talk with sensible analysts about Russia today, they'll think, well, but Putin's not going to be replaced by a Democrat. Putin will be replaced by some more extreme nationalist. To which I always answer, that may be the case, but whoever it is who replaces Putin has the ability to end the war, because he wasn't the one who started the war and can blame Putin for that. But that's sort of a mindset I think that the West has always had, that Russia is great and big and should be maintained as such. And that was, of course, I mentioned, right, in after the First World War, but also 1991, after our Singing Revolution and the Restoration. It was difficult also under the George W. Bush, no, not W, the George Bush the Elder, that the American administration was also prioritizing keeping the Soviet Union together. Remember, George Bush went to Kyiv in Ukraine in July 1991, a month before the putsch against Gorbachev, and made the speech which immediately got called the Chicken Kiev speech, because he warned the Ukrainians against independence, which he called suicidal nationalism. So that's sort of a mind frame that our American friends, but most of our Western European friends also have. And I didn't even mention nuclear weapons. That's, of course, even if you can win the argument on these other things, then it always gets trumped by, but what about all these loose nuclear weapons? Which is why we had the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, where the Americans forced the Ukrainians to give up their nuclear weapons in exchange for assurances of their territorial integrity, which has gotten us in this whole mess in the first place.
Thank you. Question over there?
I have a very simple question. I try to keep abreast of what's going on in the Baltics in regards to what Putin is doing. And my question to you, who can I trust? What news sources should I be looking at that are accessible and reliable? Because I'm afraid that what I'm reading maybe it's because it's what I want to know and not what I need to know. Is there any, what would you recommend as news sources?
Well, in terms of a traditional broadcaster, I often look at sort of the Latvian news in English, which is published by the Latvian national broadcaster, and the same for the Estonian case, which you can read sort of their online news. Well, the Latvian equivalent of the CBC, right? LSM. And they put a lot of news in English. So that would be, I think, a reliable source if you want to look specifically what's in the Baltic. Otherwise, then there are things like if you want to look in these sort of security issues, there's the International Center for Defense and Security in Tallinn, Estonia, which is often publishing these sort of in-depth briefs on security issues. But then there are also sort of pundits and analysts, like my new colleague at the University of Toronto, Timothy Snyder, who used to be at Yale. He's not a Baltic specialist, but his takes on what Russia's doing and what's happening with Ukraine and what Western leaders are thinking, I find myself almost always in agreement with him.
Okay, I think we will have to break this off. Thank you so much. Andres has recently also had an article published, which I showed in the first slide, and that will be in tomorrow's newsletter, and we'll also put it on Facebook, so you can have a read. That's what this talk was based on. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to be really privileged to have a super high-level concert after an interesting discussion by Anders Kasekamp. Arta Jēkabsone, composer and pianist Egers Tsirulis observed, Arta Jēkabsone is a voice that will soothe any pain or suffering. She is the guardian and ambassador of light, love, and peace. Yet, she can still bedazzle you with complex but not overwhelming lines and melodies, and she freely takes command of harmony and rhythm. You can't beat that one. Latvian-born and now New York City-based vocalist, composer, and arranger Arta Jēkabsone seamlessly infuses her jazz with Baltic soul, demonstrating an unshakable sense of fearlessly intimate and yet daring storytelling. She already has a rather long list of impressive achievements in multiple prestigious competitions. Arta regularly presents new works at the Jazz Gallery, one of New York City's premier venues, where she was awarded the Jazz Gallery Residency Commission Grant of 2021. And in 2023, she received the Latvian Music Award New Artist of the Year 2022. Currently, she's working on 2 upcoming albums, her solo Latvian folk jazz world project, Dziesmu Kamolinš, or Garland of Songs, and Impressions of an Era, featuring a Latvian radio big band and Latvian jazz saxophonist and composer Toms Rudzinskis. Not to be outdone, Andrew Downing is a Canadian double bass player, composer, and educator, currently based in Riga, Latvia, where he's teaching at the Jāzeps Vītols, Latvijas Muzikālās Akadēmijas. He has previously also taught at the U of T, Wilfrid Laurier University, the Creative Music Workshop in Halifax, and the Banff Center, and probably more. His musical universe straddles jazz and creative music, classical chamber music, folk and roots music, and world music. Apart from his awesomely busy career playing all over the world with multiple acclaimed groups, Andrew also leads his own Otterville Instrumental Ensemble dedicated to playing quiet, slow, contemplative music, and Utopia Ontario, which is a vehicle for his collaborative songwriting with singer Maggie Kyo. He has had a Juno nomination for his work with Otterville, as well as 3 other previous Juno awards. His signature genre-blending sound is front and center in his work as a composer. He has written pieces and arrangements for many diverse groups, ranging from banjo player James Stone to various ensembles and choirs, all the way to the Prince George Symphony and the Regina Symphony Orchestra. He plans eventually to return to Toronto to rejoin his teaching at the U of T, but today we are pleased to have right here with us at TLPA, Andrew and Arta.
Viņam ir rāmi zirgi, kalado, kalado, rāmi kaltas kamaniņas, kalado, kalado, viņam ir rāmi zirgi, kalado, kalado, kaltas kamaniņas, kalado, kalado. Laužat skalas, kurat guni, kalado, kalado. Laidiet Dievu sētiņai, kalado, kalado. Laužiet guni, kuriet guni, kalado, kalado. zvaigžņotiem cimdiņiem, kalādo, kalādo, saules meitas vārtus vērā, kalādo, kalādo, zvaigžņotiem cimdiņiem, kalādo, kalādo. Labdien visiem šajā jaukajā pēcpusdienā. Es nezinu, vai man labāk runāt angļu valodā vai latviski? Angliski. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure and honor to be here today, not tonight, because it's still afternoon and the sun is still out. We're very glad and happy to be here today with all of you and hopefully take you on a little winterish journey with us. And the songs that you're going to be hearing today, some of them are Latvian folkloric songs or arrangements that we both have arranged, and also some original music of mine, and then some Latvian holiday, I would say like Christmas music that I've known since I was a kid. And we started off this set with a Latvian folkloric song, Rāmi, Rāmi, Dieviņš brauca. And we're going to continue with a song that's called Circenīša Ziemassvētki or Cricket Christmas. Vai kāds varbūt zina šo dziesmu? Raimons Pauls un Aspazija. Circenītis aizkrāsnē, nāc puisīt mātei azotē, ak, neprasi nav maizītes, skats, skat tur laukā zvaigznītes, skats, skat tur laukā zvaigznītes, skats, skat tur laukā zvaigznītes. Lai citiem riekstiņš pīrādziņš, mums lūk tur logā mēnestiņš, tāds miež balts apaļš mēnestiņš, tik spoži citiem nespīd viņš, tik spoži citiem nespīd viņš, tik spoži citiem nespīd viņš. Beidz raudāt dēliņ rimstinu, es tev ko jauku stāstīšu, mēs runcirātos iejūksim, uz mēnestiņu nobrauksim, uz mēnestiņu nobrauksim, uz mēnestiņu nobrauksim. Tur būs tev spožas spēlītes, būs runcim zelta pelītes, tev iedos sidrab šautnīti, un vēl ar zelta gailīti, un vēl ar zelta gailīti, un vēl ar zelta gailīti. Pie sāniem būs tev zobentiņš, un logā apaļš mēnestiņš, miedz puisīt aizmiedz azotē, kāds ir cenītis aizkrāsnē, kāds ir cenītis aizkrāsnē, kāds ir cenītis aizkrāsnē. Zied circenītis aizkrāsnē, nāc puisīt mātei azotē, ak, neprasi nav maizītes, skats, kā tur laukā zvaigznītes, skats, kā tur laukā zvaigznītes, skats, kā tur laukā zvaigznītes, zvaigznītes. Probably now you remember the song, right? Yes. We're going to continue with an original composition of mine, and I also want to say that the main reason why I came to Toronto is because of this guy, this amazing person whom I've known, I think, since 2019 when we first played at the Latvian Song and Dance Festival the first time when I was in Toronto, in Canada. And I remember it so like deeply and wonderfully because it was such a true joy to play with you, and it was like so easy and like so like very welcoming. And this year I'm back because Andrew is creating these beautiful concert series called Confluence Concerts. Maybe you want to talk about it a little bit.
Sure. I don't have a microphone, but I'll speak very. Okay. Okay, that's better. I belong to an organization in Toronto called Confluence Concerts, and we put on a number of concerts every year. And I think I've been an artistic associate with Confluence for the last 5 or 6 years. And I decided this year, because I have been living in Riga since September, and I'll be there for a year until August, to try my best to learn how to speak Latvian and just be a part of the culture there. I decided that I wanted to base my concert for Confluence this year, for which I came back. I came back just for a week and a half from Riga, and I wanted to feature Arta, a Latvian singer living in New York, and I thought it would be an appropriate thing to kind of talk about my time away, my time in Latvia, to have Arta come and join us for this concert. So that's what we've done. It's with Arta and a singer also from Montreal, who's featured in the concert, and it's all songs about winter. So we thought Riga, Toronto, and Montreal were really great places to celebrate winter. So that's why Arta's here.
We have like a larger ensemble that if you're up for it, come out tonight and you're going to hear some of these songs in a larger instrumentation. And because today we're playing you a little duo, which has also been always super nice to play. And yeah, we're going to continue with a song with a title called Tev tuvumā, or Close to You. And this is a song that I wrote, I believe it was during the COVID times when I was not able to travel back to Latvia to see my family. And it was actually interesting for me. COVID time was quite, in a way, inspiring because there was more time to create music and kind of like reflect internally. And so I wrote this song about love and friendship, and also those moments of when we cannot be together in one place, like physically, we're always like still together in the heart and the spirit. And it also kind of like talks about that longing feeling to be in a close presence of your loved ones. Tev tuvumā. Krīt lēni snieg pārslas ārā aiz loga. Iestājies vakars un ielās iet klusums. Zīmēju logos savu skaistāko domu. Ziemassvētkos būt kaut kur tev tuvumā. bez liekiem vārdiem un domām. Klausīties smieklos, vērot saulī rietam, vakaros vēlos. Būt tev tuvumā vienmēr ir jaukāk. Piesnigusi taka, pa kuru reiz gājām, vērojam laternas, iedegoties vēlā vakar stundā. Mēs iekritām sniegā, zīmējām eņģeļus līdz uz ausīs rīts, un gaisma mūs veda katru savā ceļā. Bez liekiem vārdiem un domām, klausīties smieklos, vērot saulī rietam, vakaros vēlos. Būt tev tuvumā vienmēr ir jaukāk. Kad sirds tā iedegas, tev tuvumā esot. Un pazūd laiks, veroties viens otram acīs. Es staigāju ielās, vēroju gaismas spožās. Klusībā ceru tevi ieraudzīt nākamam pretī. Bez liekiem vārdiem un domām, klausīties smieklos, vērot saulī rietam, vakaros vēlos. Būt tev tuvumā vienmēr ir jaukāk. 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 We have this interesting thing. I feel like home, so we can share all these stories. So there has been a lot of also change in the music technology side. Like sometimes, like you remember, usually at the concerts, people would have like sheet music that you actually take a paper and you flip the page. So now we have all these smart devices, right? Which is kind of cool because it kind of helps the environment from one side, but from the other side, it also can be a little bit like tricky because we also have these little pedal things. And sometimes they have the mind of their own. They just decide to like either like. And I had that actually yesterday when we were playing the concert. Right at the beginning, we played the first song, and now I pressed the pedal to like switch the page, and suddenly like the page flips goes like shh, 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 shh. I'm like somewhere else. And so that's the modern age, the technology, it sometimes fails you. But it's good now. We're going to continue with a beautiful song. They're all beautiful, and it's just like such a fun thing to always just play music and kind of do something that really like speaks to our own hearts, and hopefully that also resonates with all of you. But this next song is actually from a Christmas movie in Latvia called Ziemassvētku Jāmpadracis. I don't know if some of you maybe also have seen this movie. And this movie, it talks about a family who I believe, I remember, I think it was like 5 children in total, and their dad, he's a piano teacher, and suddenly, like during the Christmas time, they suddenly he loses the work that he used to have, and he's trying to figure out how to basically sustain the family, and so they can eat and they can have like a good Christmas all together. And also, meanwhile, there's also a concert that they all want to attend, which is like this young like wonder child who wants to play, who's a piano player, and they want to see that concert. But suddenly, because of all this like chaos that is happening at the house, and like the kids are very aware that the father doesn't have the money anymore, so they're trying to help the father somehow to like get this money for this concert and for the Christmas. But somehow I kind of quite don't remember the story. But basically, this wonder child suddenly is unable to play because like in the midst of that chaos, I guess like he also broke his finger or something. And so the father stepped in and like did the concert for them and kind of was the wonder child. But at the end, like of course, like this movie ends with a happy ending that everything works out and the father is getting back to work and things are kind of back to normal. But at the end, like they do this really beautiful song, which I remember just listening to a lot when I grew up back in Latvia in Kandava. And it's with a title called Veltījums mīlestībai, or Dedication to Love. And we're gonna do this song for you. And I also want to wish everybody at this moment, we truly live in, as I yesterday said, like in an interesting time, and interesting good and bad. But at the same time, what I'm now, a lot of the times when I'm doing the concerts and I'm always like thinking about this, what can I do to change that? How can I serve to people? And I know that I cannot like affect the way how things are in the world, but what I can do is like spread more love and spread more light, and hopefully that impacts the people who are sitting in this room, and hopefully that energy goes far and you affect those people who are around you. And I think that's honestly the only way how I believe as humans we can make that change, because we have to start from here, and then hopefully it just leads to more peace around where we are walking and going in this life. So, dedication to love.
Kas tumsā laistās? Kas tas ir, kas tumsā laistās? Nevaru es atcerēties. Atceros es tikai vienu, tas ar tevi ļoti saistās. Ar tevi saistās. Vai tas bija mums un zudā? Kas tur tagad tumsā laistās? Vai tas bija mums un zudā? Kas tur tagad tumsā laistās. Arvien siltāk, arvien spožāk, tas ar tevi ļoti saistās. Tas ar tevi saistās. Visas lietas, kas ir skaistas, man ar tevi saistās.
Now, well, the next song. This one I wrote last year because of the Latvian Song and Dance Festival in Canada, in Toronto. And I had this special request from one of the organizers that it would be nice if you could compose a song using a poetry by one of the Latvian Canadian poets. And because when I came to United States, one thing I really fell in love back with the Latvian folkloric music because growing up, when I was a kid, I did play a lot of that music. And then during my high school, when I studied more jazz music, I kind of ventured in a different world, studying more jazz and learning about the improvisation, learning these other things. And so I kind of put all those things that I knew as a kid aside so I can venture into something new. But when I arrived in the United States, I realized, how about now is the time when I kind of put all my things that I love together, like my Latvian folkloric music with the jazz music. And also then another thing that I learned was that there's a lot of amazing poets that lived in Hell's Kitchen. And so I started to read a lot of poetry by them and started to also compose music based on their poetry. And often I used Leonard Stones and Gunnar Seliņš and Elza Tezbera. And then I finally got introduced to Veltatoma. And so maybe some of you were at the concert last year when they did the concert at the jazz bistro, and now also I think it was the Thursday night jazz concert that was happening in the hotel. And we also performed this song. And yesterday, a couple of days ago, speaking with Mara. She also kind of encouraged me to play this song today, and so we added to our list. So we're going to do a beautiful song with a poetry by Veltatoma with a title called Pie Hurona ezera. And actually, I've never been to this lake, so this is my next. It's one of my goals to do it soon, because I want to see that magic, because I definitely feel that in a song. I need to stop talking. Talk a lot.
tavu šalkoņu un viļņošanu, kad kvēlās smiltīs saulē spēlējos. Taviem oļiem pārcilājot tos, pēc viena meklējot, ko dēvētu manu. Tad pelnu pelēkā ar iesarkanu uz pieres zīmi olī skatījos. Sārtums būtu raksts, dzīves ielkalts laimi zīmējot, un mūsu laime dāvināt un dot. Tā olī zīlē no dzelmes gūtā par manu pieņemtā un līdziniekā ik sīkai sāpei bezgalīgam priekā. Es ar tavu mieru vēlējos, kad kvēlās smiltīs saulē spēlējos.
Nākošā dziesmiņa ir ļoti speaking in Latvian, speaking in English. It's like, always this happens to me. So the next song is a very well-known song, but this time I think I learned this song in Latvian, but you might know it too. So we might switch also to English. We'll see how things go and flow in Latvian. Also join me if you want to do some percussion. Yeah, because I know you stretched before. So, and if you want to like dance, you're more than welcome to do so. Because this is the real jazz. Well, used to be like a dance, the form of dancing, right?
Lai aiz loga tas augstums briesmīgs, uguns mums tik silta liesmo, un valda tāds mājīgs prieks. Lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, šiet, ka nepārstās snikt šai naktī. Egle mirdz kā zelta satīts, un doma tik gaiša šķiet. Lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, pārāk skaisti šie mirkļi šķiet. Drīz jau laimītes varēsim liet, rūķi dāvanas pakociet. Svētki, nu nedrīkstiet prom iet, lai aiz loga tas augstums briesmīgs. Uguns mums tik silta liesmo, un valda tāds mājīgs prieks. Lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg. we are li ao. Shadu bu bu bam be do do we do ao. Ba-dum bu do do da le bu ba do 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 we do do le do da de de do. Shada do we do da lu da de ao. Bu bam ba do de you ao de. Ba bu ba we do do da we de ao. Bu bu ba we do do we do do do. La la da do da la la do da le le ao. Bu bu we do 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 le ao. But we do do le le ao. Lighting sneak, lighting sneak, lighting sneak. Sada. Lai aizloga tas augstums briesmīgs, uguns mums tik silta liesmo, un valda tāds mājīgs prieks, visi kopā, lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg. Bet šķiet, ka nepārstās sniegt šai naktī, jo egle mirdz kā zelta satīns, un doma tik gaiša šķiet. Lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg. Pārāk skaisti šie mirkļi šķiet, drīz jau laimītes varēsim liet, rūķi dāvanas pakociet, svētki nedrīkstiet projām jūs iet, lai aizloga tas augstums briesmīgs, uguns mums tik silta liesmo. Bet valda tāds mājīgs prieks, jo lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg. Lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg. Vēl vienreiz. Lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg, lai tik snieg.
Thank you so much, Arta and Andrew, and they're still going to play one piece for us, though.
Thank you so much for being such a lovely listeners and also participating in some of those little thingies that have been happening here. We're going to close off this little set with a song that truly each and one of you know. Maybe the arrangement is a little bit different, but I highly encourage, if you want to sing along with me, please do so. I don't think that I have to announce the song. You'll know it.
Klusa nakts, svētā nakts, visi dus nomodā. Vēl ir Jāzeps un Marija, kūtī Davida pilsētā. Jēzus silīte dus, Jēzus silīte dus. Klusa nakts, svētā nakts, ganiem Dievs novēl pats. Dzirdēt eņģeļu slavējam, tuvu tālu skandinam. Kristus glābējs ir klāt. Kristus glābējs ir klāt. Klusa nakts, svētā nakts, Dieva dēls, tava ats. Mirdz mums dievišķā skaidrībā, nu ir dvēsele pestītā, jo tu dzimis par mums, jo tu dzimis par mums. Klusa nakts, svētā nakts, visi dus nomodā. Vēl ir Jāzefs un Marija, kūtī Dāvida pilsētā. Jēzus silīte dus, Jēzus silīte dus. Priecīgas Ziemassvētkus un laimīgu jauno gadu! Happy holidays!
Paldies visi, tiekamies nākamnedēļ uz Ziemassvētku svinībām, and everybody else, see you on the first Thursday in 2026.
And I'd like to thank Andrew, Andres, and Arta very much for this wonderful program that you've given us today. Thank you again from all of our hearts.